Hi everyone, I'm Grandmaster Magesh Panchanathan and this is Kings and Queens Chess Academy's YouTube channel. Today we're going to be continuing on Paul Morphy's games and series. We have already put up a bunch of videos on some of his great games. Hopefully you've had a chance to see some of that. Today we'll be studying King's Gambit, a very dangerous opening and a very aggressive opening that probably fit Morphy's style very well. And we're going to take a look at a couple of his games from the King's Gambit and how he used it for an aggressive attack and win. Let's jump into the games. The first one we're going to look at is Paul Morphy against Alexander Meek. And the opening is e4, e5, and f4. This is the King's Gambit. What it does is basically gives up the f pawn. White is giving up that f pawn and putting his own king in real danger. That is usually the danger of such an aggressive opening. What does White get in return? A very strong center and also a possibly faster developing situation, because when this pawn goes out of e5, White will get to play e5 and that will delay Black's development and slow it down a little bit. So this will make it faster for White to develop pieces and also have stronger control in the center. Having said that, it's an extremely dangerous opening because, like I said, it opens up quite a bit of exposure to the White king, right? But it also gives a really nice chance in the future to attack the Black king along the f5. So that's the kind of give and take in this particular opening. So let's see what happens. A knight f3, a very common move to stop the queen from going to h4. Even in the second game, you're going to see that Morphy does allow that, and we'll see that in the second game. After g5, Black makes a very simple statement saying, I want to hold on to the pawn. And you can notice that g5 is probably one of the few ways to save this pawn. There is no other way easily to save this pawn. If bishop ever goes to d6, White can always play e5. So g5 is one of the important moves to save the pawn, but it also makes this king a little bit more weak. Again, makes this game quite double-edged, because what can Black get? Well, maybe g4. Push forward, gain even more space, and attack the White king. What can Black lose? Maybe the exposure by pushing the pawn on the king side makes his king weak. Again, all of these things are in a great balance. So White plays bishop to c4, and after bishop g7, Morphy goes h4. A very common theme in undermining these two pawns, right? Black's pawns on the king side are extremely strong and it gives more space, and that kind of restricts White's pieces too. So h4 does a good job of trying to get those pawns to loosen up and start capturing those. Black should have played h6. In the game, g4 was played. I like h6 because it simply allows Black to keep the pawns intact. So for example, pawn captures. The bishop on g7 really helps to protect the rook, and everything seems normal here. So let's see what happens after g4. It allows Morphy to play the most aggressive move, knight g5, and immediately creating a pressure on f7. Black responded with the best way to defend f7 with knight h6. Here, Morphy goes for a really subtle piece sacrifice. I wouldn't even call it a piece sacrifice because he kind of gets it back very quickly, or he could have. But it's important that he sees it and you see it too, right? Black actually has a strong threat here, and Morphy kind of ignores it and plays d4 and says, you know what, I'm going to go for the center and I'm going to just pick up this pawn. Now that pawn, the g pawn had moved to g4, no one's guarding it and no one can easily guard it. No, none of the pieces can do it. Queen f6 could be one possibility, but guess what? It allows e5, and also it's not like the queen's going to guard this forever, right? If, for example, if this rook comes to f1 after castling, that pawn's like gone. Black is not going to be able to hold on to that for a longer period. But Black did have a strong threat, which was f6. And suddenly you see that the strong, amazing knight on g5 is trapped in the middle of the board, nowhere to go. Right? Absolutely nowhere to go. So Morphy, of course, had planned this very clearly. He was ready to give up the knight. So he goes bishop takes f4, pawn takes, bishop takes g5. But as you can see, this pressure on the queen kind of gives him the knight right back, because the only way to save this queen is bishop f6. So Morphy is able to, actually, we played the move quickly. Queen to d2 was what was played in the game. Morphy didn't even want to take this knight. He could have taken bishop takes h6. Black probably would have had some bishop h4 check. I still like White's position. I don't think there is any problem. But Black clearly has some play that we don't want that. We really don't need Black to have that. and Morphy rightly chooses queen to d2. Why? Because look at this knight. The knight that you did not capture does not have a lot of places to go to. It has g8 or f7. Both look pretty bad, right? So let's see what happened in the game. Knight to f7 was played, and Morphy played bishop takes, king takes, and queen f4 check. King to g8, and this is a good place to say, kind of observe what is going on this game, what is happening, right? Morphy is down a piece, he's down a bishop, but you can see most pieces for white and black are staying inside. Not many pieces have moved except for this queen. But the good news is this rook, without ever moving, is still extremely active in a great place. And these pawns are doing a great job for white, right? So these are all the good things for white. And black's good thing is, of course, the extra bishop. The next few moves, you're going to see typical Morphy style, how he completely changes the scene when black does not have any time to do anything, right? Castle, simple move. The rook comes into action on the f file, threatening checkmate. So black had to react. Next move, again, white comes up with a great idea. Morphy's subtle, developing tempo moves. I love those moves. Knight to c3. You might say, oh, it's not a great move. What is that? Just bring the knight out. That's right. But the knight is out, and the knight's threatening to go to d5. From there, maybe to f6, maybe to c7. Too many threats. Black has to react. Black would have loved to play knight to c6. Black would have loved to play d6. Cannot do those moves because Morphy is creating threats. c6 had to be played to stop knight to d5. Hope you can guess Morphy's next move. Yes, he brought the last piece into the game. Rook a e1. Now you know why I love his games, right? Beautiful coordination of pieces. d6. I would recommend you pause and try to find out the best move for white. Alright, hopefully you figured out the finish. When all your pieces are ready, time to jump in and break through. Knight to d5. Again, a simple but brilliant sacrifice. Black is almost forced to capture, and after e takes d5, it's game over. And you can kind of see why black is lost because of that. And it didn't happen because black is completely ignoring development. It's because Morphy plays like that. He is making you react to his threats all the time, not giving enough chances for his opponent to develop their own pieces. So now the queen basically has nowhere to go to save checkmate. So basically checkmate coming from all directions, right? So f7, f8, and e8. For example, if he goes to g7, that's checkmate. If he goes to d8, that would be checkmate. And if he goes anywhere else, maybe this would be checkmate. So there is no way he's defending any of that. So black resigned in this position. Let's move on to the next one. So in this one, Morphy is playing an unknown player in 1856, and the opening is still the same, the King's Gambit. Pawn captures, and this time Morphy goes for bishop to c4. He's actually allowing queen h4 check here, right? So let's see what happens. Queen h4, king f1. So this is actually common, to put the king on f1 and still continue the attack. It creates a little bit more imbalance, because in most Morphy's games you see that, oh, Morphy is completely developed and all his pieces are good and his king is safe and his opponent is not. But here we have slightly other way around. We have a great development, great center, but also a weak king. That's what you're probably going to see. Will create a little bit more imbalance in the position. After g5, which I don't think was necessary in the game, because I think this pawn is not really in too much attack. The queen is definitely guarding f4, right? Knight to c3 was played. Bishop g7 and d4. Again, very typical moves. Morphy is developing all his pieces. And finally grabs this tempo, which has been sitting there for a while, to kick that queen out. The reason probably he delayed this is because as soon as the queen moves, black immediately creates a threat on his own, which is g4. But now Morphy is ready with more pieces, so he's ready to create his own threats. Knight to d5, creating immediate problems on c7. How do you defend this fork? It's not easy for black. Only one possible move was there, and that's a little odd looking move, but it still does the job. King to d8. So the king defends a pawn, stops the fork, and everything is okay. So the next move that white plays is very subtle, and I really like. So Morphy's style again is to combine between aggression and consolidation and coordination. So what he does here is notices that his pieces are in good place, but there is one particular point that's a soft spot. He has strong pawns, but this pawn is actually kind of weak. For one, there is a pin that's going on, and that pin is definitely going to allow that capture on d4. The second thing is anytime g4 could happen, undermining the knight, by which undermining the pawn, right? So Morphy goes for a very subtle c3. Again, you might not expect him to do this in the middle of a very aggressive attacking game, but this is required. You really have to consolidate your center. So here black went for knight f6. I think a little iffy in my opinion. What it does, it gives an important tempo for Morphy, that is e5. So after knight takes, bishop takes e5, now bishop has to run back again, and white has this beautiful center, yeah? Very strong, has more space, and in a fantastic position. And the next thing Morphy does here is again undermines the kingside pawns that black has. We talked about this a little bit in the previous game. With black's strong pawns, it usually restricts white's pieces, and that h4 move allows white to break those pawns. Clearly, black doesn't want to take and give up the f4 pawn, right? And so black plays f6, a natural move, says, you want to break my pawns, I want to break your central pawns, right? Not bad at all. But now the next move again is very subtle from Morphy. Again, I like it. Simple moves, king to g1. What does he do? He gets his king out of any trouble possibly on the f-file, but at the same time protects that rook. There was a little pin going on here which was stopping white from taking that pawn. But now by playing king g1, this rook is defended and white is creating a threat. Even in his defensive improving moves, he's creating threats. That's the beauty of Morphy. After pawn to g4, he simply pulls knight back to h2 and both the pawns are under attack. Black plays pawn takes e5 and Morphy goes knight takes g4. So here I still think black is doing fine. Black probably can be okay in this game if he played something like d6 or d5, which I think is quite interesting because it sets up a double attack. Morphy should be able to defend it with bishop e2. The position I feel like is still interesting with both kings out in the open. Very much playable. But here goes the big mistake, e takes d4. And I've noticed this a lot of times. This is why I keep saying Morphy was ahead of his time, because he always valued pieces and activity a lot more than actual material. So playing a move like d5 would have been probably more natural for him, where he wants to activate that bishop. That bishop needs to get out, right? The rook needs to get out. You cannot be waiting there for a longer period of time. But once e takes d4 happens, the game is pretty much over now, because now the center is wide open and the king is right there. And bishop g5 is an immediate threat. Black should have played h6 here, try to stop this move. Would have been natural, but black went for rook f8, allowing bishop g5 check, and this pretty much sealed the game. After knight e7, queen e2. Now there is just no way to defend this knight. Black plays rook e8, and there are so many ways for white to finish this off, but I want you to pause and try to see if you can find the best move that Morphy played. Hopefully you figured it out. The minute you see that king, you should think of smothered mate. Knight e5. It would have been nice if the queen was a sacrifice, because the bishop is guarding it, but you would see that Morphy has no intentions of taking that queen back. After queen captures e2, if you take the queen back, bishop takes knight would be bad for white, but knight to f7 is a beautiful smothered mate. So overall, 2 games in King's Gambit, both extremely aggressive, but still typical Morphy style. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you.